Hi Albert, welcome to the show. Today at Data Debunked, we're talking about platform independence of a modern data stack. We will cover file formats, data catalogs, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, George. So today, I think we're talking about is do we truly have independence, right? Um, and I would argue that we don't have really independence, right? The idea here is that if I write Iceberg in AWS, can I go and take those same Iceberg files uh, and move it to another public cloud or even on-prem?
Yeah,
And
that's a
what's
scary
missing,
idea on-prem where you have to manage the infra yourself, right? And you have to deal
yeah.
with a rusty Hive metastore.
Yeah, right. And so the thing is that what you're trying to find is commonality between the two. Because if you picked AWS Glue as your meta store in for Apache Iceberg, that won't necessarily work on GCP or on-prem because Glue is a AWS only feature.
I mean, you can at least make the network connectivity to Glue, right? And then try to monkey patch it in, but there will be latency that is going to be an issue with regards to transactional capabilities that you would expect from a data warehouse.
Yes, and then you'd have to pay for all the ingress, egress costs. It becomes very, very complex architecturally, right? Um, I think the other idea is instead of having the sprawl is to sort of say, hey, we're going to have is all our data in AWS, and then we can move the entire data warehouse to GCP or on-prem, right?
Yeah.
Then the
I mean,
thing
what
is
people
that
agree on, Albert, is right that Parquet is the bare minimum. So we can store data, but it doesn't have any of the data warehouse goodness. What
no,
options do we have to bring that back? To keep the data warehouse goodness, but be interoperable?
yeah. So when you look at the major formats here, you're talking about Iceberg, Hoodie, Delta Lake, right? The most commonality you'll find is HMS as your option, right?
Yeah.
HMS would allow you to go and use all those things. If you talk about, like Glue, it's only in AWS. If you talk about Nessie, it really only supports Iceberg, right? If you're talking about is Unity only really supports is Delta Lake, right? Um, the problem also yet again is that you're stuck in a certain ecosystem. And so we make this comment that says that for, you know, what really it is that vendors are saying, yeah, we'll use open source, like we use it as a data format. But what they're doing is that they're controlling the meta store layer. And if
Yes.
they can control what meta stores can be implemented in what environments, right? That dictates where they want you to go and send the data and what products that they want to go and integrate
Yes.
it, be able to integrate it with, right?
And not
And not
only
only
what
what
products you
products you
integrate with, but
integrate with, but
also what
also
you're
what you're
paying,
paying,
right?
right?
Because there's
Because
usually a
there's usually a
Yeah.
transaction per
transaction per
second
second
associated with
associated with
using these
using
meta
these meta
stores.
stores.
I always
I
like to
always like to
compare it to
compare it
like a
to like a
Milky Way
Milky Way
sinkhole where all
sinkhole
the
where all the
stars are
stars are
flying into a
flying
black
into a black
hole,
hole,
and then
and
you
then
never
you
see your
never see
data
your data
again.
again.
Absolutely right. And so the thing is that, if they can go and dictate what environments you're in, do you really have interoperability? Do you really you know, have you truly decoupled data from the underlying infrastructure? And I would argue no. And there's that comment, right? So we kind of know that the meta store is where the control point of various projects are.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
the next thing that a lot of people would ask, well, so why don't they fix this? Why, you get the comments like, Hive is really, really old. Yes, it'll work on everything, but Hive is very, very old, right?
Yes, but
Why
Yes, but
can't they
everything is
everything
just
is
coupled to
integrate?
it,
coupled to
right?
it,
So
right?
it
So
works
it
quite
works quite
nicely with
nicely
it.
with it.
Yeah, because it does what it needs to go and do, right? And so, people then would say, well, why can't they, why can't these newer, catalogs, uh, like Nessie or whatnot, why can't they go and support it? And the problem is that I think each project has certain types of preferences, right? If you ask the iceberg guys, they'll say, yeah, we'll support HMS, but we really want you to support Iceberg REST catalog, right? And if you ask the Delta Lake guys, they'll say, yes, we'll support HMS, but we really, really want you to use Unity, right? Uh, Hoodie's the only one that really doesn't have a game in this fight, right? They just say that they will use HMS, right? Um, which is kind of interesting in itself about their own strategy. But if you go and say, hey, once I pick, like the Iceberg Rice catalog, you basically have eliminated all your other options, meaning that you're going to be a pure Iceberg shop, or if you're Unity, you're gonna basically say you're a pure Delta Lake shop, right? And that
Yeah,
kind of leads
I
to
mean,
another.
usually Unity is not only pure Delta Lake shop, that would be still be rather open. It is a pure Databricks shop, right? With all the,
Yes,
let's say,
yes.
extra pricing and fee management fee.
Yes, yeah. So this is like one of those, it leads to another topic about is, how many, what vendors or what projects are pretty open or not. There was another interesting article written by another tech luminary, and he basically took all the commits, like anybody who had, I think more than 1% of the commit base of various projects. And if you look at something like Delta Lake, the top 30 committers are all Databricks employees, right? And if you look at something like Iceberg, uh, maybe Iceberg has around 50% uh, that has been committed by Tabular itself. And then if you look at something like Apache Hoodie, Hoodie's around I think 20 some percent is written by One House, which is the main author of it, right? So we always talk about the bus factor, right? If you talk about it, or in this sense, is like how much vendor control, right? So is Delta Lake truly a open source project if it's only one vendor that's committing almost all the source code, right? Uh, and then the next thing it would be is like what is an acceptable percentage of the code base should be owned by one company within an open source project, right? Whether that's 50% or something lower like 20 something percent.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's a really interesting thing to go ask about, is this kind of like a Trojan horse, right? So
Yeah.
it
But
leads the
talking about
whole.
this, Albert, I mean, recently there has been the development of this one table, right? This shared thing that is sort of starting to look into the direction of making a replaceable catalog, open catalog. Will this help us?
Yeah, I think it will help to a certain extent, right? So I think the problem that they're trying to solve is not necessarily the catalog itself directly, but it's the problem around is that once you pick as a open table format like Iceberg, you feel like you're locked into that ecosystem, right? Or you pick Delta Lake, right? And so the promise of Apache X table is that I'll be able to convert one open table format to another and make it bidirectional. So I'll write it in Iceberg, but I can read it in Hoodie, or I write it in uh, Delta Lake and I can read it in Iceberg, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
But if I get it right, it's not a streaming real-time conversion, it's sort of a batch conversion. So it's not the data warehouse transactional semantics of like write once, read anywhere sort of, but you have to convert it. It's an offline process.
yeah, as far as I know, at least the first releases right now are essentially what you mentioned. It is a batch type of job. Uh, so it does take a little bit time for it to go and propagate from one format to the other, but at least you have the option of that you're not tied to one format. And now that you can move between formats, you can take the advantages of all the different formats, right? So I would make the argument here is that, say, for instance, Iceberg is really, really good for reads, right? So if you're a 90-10 shop, Iceberg makes a lot of sense. But if you're really heavy on writes, um, Hoodie, like a 50-50 workload, 50% writes, 50% reads. Hoodie may be a better thing, right? So this is where you can get the best of both worlds, right? Underneath, right, Xtable, if you're not familiar with it, underneath it's still Parquet. Or
Yeah.
there might be also some org files that is there, but underneath is primarily it is Parquet, but what they're doing is that they're transforming only the metadata layer of all the table formats.
I mean, the change tracking and the read on write versus the so merge on read versus merge on write has to also be transformed, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And so luckily now it's like there's more parity between all the open table formats, so they are more similar from that standpoint. But I think uh, it really comes down to is yet again why you would pick Iceberg over Hoodie or Delta Lake, and this idea of a lock-in, right? This idea that you're locked into that one format. I think that's the thing that they're going to go try to solve. Uh, but it still is above that, right? So now that you've kind of have uh, no way for a single format to dominate the table format, there's still the question of the metadata layer, right?
Yes.
If we're going to choose
About the
HMS,
statistics, right? About optimizing the queries, about making them cheap, fast, and this is not solved, right?
yeah, this is not solved because yet again, the most commonality between all of them is HMS, right? It's the oldest technology, right? That what people would say, but it's
Yes.
also the one where everybody it kind of works from that standpoint. It's like the argument of,
But there are some
oh,
issues with it, right? Like Hive and Trino are differently interpreting sometimes stuff what is in the Hive metastore. It has to do with the order of the columns, how they're written into the files versus into the metastore. So there are some, let's say, intricate, tricky details that you have to get right.
yes, that you have a lot. You talk also about scalability too, like trying to scale like the Hive database, right? Single point of failure, right?
Right.
Uh,
I mean, it's a traditional
people are,
RDBMS for people to make it less, let's more clear, right? It's a traditional
yeah,
Postgres database, maybe with multiple master replication, whatever. But it's the single point of failure of your whole Hadoop cluster.
yeah, it's a single, yes, and some, people would argue that that's not, that's why it is what it is because it was built in a time that was much different than what it is now. Um,
Yes.
and then but it still comes to this. Okay, so we got this HMS. It works for everybody. It's the oldest piece of technology. It does what it needs to go do. We're fine with it. Some people argue that it's not just because it's old, but also some of the scalability issues, the operations, right? So, but what do we have as options from that standpoint, right? And the problem is all the options are not necessarily great on compatibility, right? So we touched on
Yes.
this earlier.
I think they're currently mutually exclusive, right? And on the open side, so non-directly vendor-backed side, I only really see NASC. Let me quickly get this
The
onto the
stream so
stream
people
so
can
people can
see at least
see
a
at least
nice
a
NSC
nice
icon.
icon.
And the other one
And the
is
other one is
Iceberg
Iceberg
REST.
REST.
Am I
Am I
missing
missing
something here?
something
Because
here?
I think
Because
the
I think
others
the
are all
others are
very
all
much
very much
closed
closed
vendor,
vendor,
backed with
backed with
AWS Glue
AWS
being
Glue
a
being a
very
very
big
big
contender there.
contender there.
Yeah, I think there's also some other meta stores also in the running. What's it called? It escapes my mind. It's Data Hub. Was it Data Hub?
But that is more from a governance perspective. It's not like an operational data catalog.
Yes.
It's more like humans can look at it for the sake of taking a look at the lineage. Like there's
Right,
a
right.
project data hub, there's open metadata, there's like so many of them.
There is. Yeah, that's a good point, George. It's that yeah, so because the thing is people argue that that should be part of the core metadata service itself, right? And right now we're treating it as a nice to add-on. But I think, if you take that.
But if we go back, Albert, in time, let's say Oracle data warehouse world, like black box appliance world, people had the Informatica. And Informatica was this catalog, which may never properly work because maybe we didn't properly use Informatica, but it was also separate back in the days, right? So why should it be a combined thing today?
Yeah, I think it's, the argument there is that it's like one throat to choke, right? One piece of technology that you can go and use for everything. It's much, much more simplistic. That is a question I think that's everybody argues all the time, whether we should have a single product that could do everything versus uh, a catalog kit that just only does is the core basics, and then when you want governance and lineage, you can find it from some other system.
Yeah. I mean, I always like the systems that are not a total lock-in, that I have some open source space and community, that have a vendor backing it. So if you want to get commercial support, you can get it. And it gives you the flexibility of hosting on-premise, actually not in the cloud, in your own cloud VPC tenant, and then backed in the SaaS cloud of the vendor. And there are many limited options for doing this with a catalog.
Yeah, they're very limited options, right? So I think we named them all. And the question is if you wanted to support only one format, as opposed to multiple open table formats, right? And so that's a bigger picture, right? The question is like if you believe that Delta Lake will rule the world, and you don't see a world where another format like Iceberg or Hoodie will be in that picture. Um, that's a specific view. There's the other view that um, the use cases for all the formats will not be the same, and so therefore you can see places where you'll see Iceberg used in the same organization, Hoodie for other use cases, and maybe even Delta Lake for other organizations,
But
right?
can you be more specific? For which use cases do you think would some specific file format be a good fit? I guess for the listeners of our show, it would be cool to have some advice here because it's quite rare to find good advice on where they fit well.
Yeah, so if you ask me from that standpoint, I think so. Delta Lake is probably the strongest on Spark environments, right? You'll see that because why? Spark primarily came from Databricks, and also Delta Lake came from Databricks, right? So obviously the two are going to be most tied together, and most of the commits also come from Delta Lake themselves, right? And then if you look at uh, people who are primarily Parquet, right? The guy who wrote Apache Iceberg also wrote is the Parquet format. So if you're a Parquet organization, you're probably going to go and pick is Iceberg as your next format. And then if you look at Hoodie, where did their lineage come from? Like Hadoop, if you break apart the words in Hoodie, it stands for Hadoop updates and incrementals, right? And so the idea here was that they saw a gap in Hadoop environments of being able to do upserts, and so therefore they wanted to go provide that along with transactional features, right?
Yeah.
So you get those traditional, use cases, and then overlaid on top of it is, this idea of like, where is it optimized for? And so that's why I mentioned a little bit in the past is that Iceberg tends to be very good for the traditional OLAP use case, which is like 90% reads, 10% writes, right? And then Hadoop is more like a 50-50 split. Um, and you'll tend to find if you do benchmarking, and this is just my own personal benchmarking, and when I do benchmarking between um, Iceberg and Hadoop, I find that Hoodie and Iceberg, I find that Hoodie is almost 2 times more performant than Iceberg on the same type of use case, same type of data set that I'm writing. Um, Delta Lake's a little bit harder to go and benchmark, to be honest. And for myself, I haven't benchmarked it truly against all the 2 other formats,
Yeah.
primarily because um, the question becomes is whether you trust is Delta Lake will go and provide is optimizations for non-Spark users, non
Yeah.
Databricks users, right?
I mean, we're just
They're going
getting
to be,
started with this, right, Albert, with the Rust integration, the Python integration without Spark. But I think the key thing where Delta is different compared to Iceberg, for example, is that Iceberg always requires you to have this shared centralized catalog, where Delta just is sort of the SQLite, I believe, database sitting right in the file format. So you don't have to have some central services to set up, to authorize, to coordinate. It's just there straight in your bucket, sort of self-managed.
yeah, and I would argue whether that is a good like design, right? I understand for ease of use, but when you think about, these large data sets, right, where you have tens, hundreds, thousands of Parquet files, right? Uh, what are you going to do when any of those files actually change, right? You're going to have to go through a for loop for all those hundreds, tens, hundreds, thousands of files to see any changes. And so this is the value of a metastore, right? The value of the metastore is that I can go to one place to see all the files and say, hey, instead of me just scanning all the files all the time to find what has changed or where is everything, I just look inside of the metastore and says, give me a record of, Albert. And so it says, oh, it's in file 2001, right? Or for
Yeah,
George, it's 4001, right? Or
yeah,
4005 from that standpoint. I don't have to do
yeah,
that scanning. I can just look inside and just say
yeah,
that's where the specific file, and it reduces that time for you to go and do the lookups. It also helps for any of the
yeah.
uh, state transitions between data, right?
What I find
Whether
interesting, Albert, is that I was growing up with the Hadoop ecosystem, and it was all about ORC and how it was so nicely compatible with Hive. But none of the formats that you mentioned before, Iceberg, Hoodie, Delta, they really don't build on top of Orc, right? They more tend to build on Parquet. Did I get this right?
Yeah, they do for certain things, right? So, but majority is Parquet, right? I think so. Like for if I say for instance talk about Iceberg, uh, they do the deltas, right? So the primary file is Parquet, but all the insertions are org files, and then there's a background process a little bit later to do compactation to remerge back into a single Parquet, right? Uh, so I think they use a combination realistically as time goes on. So you start as a single Parquet, but as time goes on, when you do inserts and updates, then you'll say there'll be arc files plus Parquet, and then when you hit that compactation, then it'll go back to a
Yeah.
single Parquet file, and then the
But in
process
the case
repeat.
of Delta, it is a Parquet file, and then the JSON files, which are compacted to the more Parquet files as you go on. But why
Mm.
did they choose org files jointly to Parquet files? That is an interesting thing.
Yeah,
Do you know
there
this?
might be yes. So I don't know why they picked that specific strategy, right? Uh, it'd be interesting to have Denny, who is a developer advocate, and as far as I am concerned, the leader of the Delta Lake Committee, for him to go and um, explain why they picked that as opposed to using orc, right? Because orc is pretty common, I would think, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and it's not necessarily anything that's proprietary. Uh, you can make an argument, and this is the part where I'm just guessing what Denny would say was that a lot of the data that comes on in um, is is in JSON format. So if you talk about like traditional Kappa or Lambda architecture, most data is sent to you as a JSON file, right? You pull it off of a Kafka queue, it's in JSON, right? And maybe you want it if you want it for speed, you just serialize the entire JSON file, and therefore that way you can see here are the individual records. Um, you don't get that with orc, right? Because typically I think so orc files only represent as a single row within a table, and
Yes, they're
theoretically,
columnar, yeah.
yeah, and theoretically the JSON could represent a single object that goes across multiple tables too, right?
Yes.
Um, so there are some reasons, right? Or
Yeah.
it's a placeholder for other things.
Yeah.
I'm just speculating, right?
Yeah. So do you think one file format, or also as a second question, one catalog will win the race here and overtake them all?
Oh yeah. So this is a hard question to go say, right? So I come from maybe um a slightly different heritage than most data people, right? So I came from Red Hat, right? And one of the things that we always, when I joined Red Hat, we were asking, or I asked, like, Red Hat's so popular, why do we still have SUSE? And why wasn't there more than SUSE, right? And if you can remember the Linux format wars, is that there were many, many distributions, right? And what happens is, like, I don't know if it is because of human nature and whatnot, but it tends to be that you whittle down this large set of distributions, Linux distributions, down to maybe three or two, right? So
Yeah.
there's never one. There's never going to be a winner take all from that standpoint. And the reason why is that the marketplace is not going to let you have one person dominate that thing, right?
Unless
Because
you're
they want this
OpenSSL.
huh?
Unless you're OpenSSL.
Well, yeah, I guess for certain things there may be, dominant from but even for a lot of tech, I think so there are, even small percentages, right? So you talk about oh, maybe that's another other thing altogether. But my thesis that I'm going to say is that customers want choice, right?
Yes,
And
indeed.
the thing is that I don't think what's going to happen is like Delta Lake is going to win it all or Iceberg is going to win it all. I think there's ones that's going to be a huge portion. I'm not sure if it's going to be like between those three, like it's going to be 33% divided equally, right? I think even if you ask right now, my gut assumption says that Delta Lake probably has 80%, 70% of the open table format on out there because it's the defaults if you're using the Spark environment. And then, Iceberg is definitely in number two spot because so many vendors support it. Uh, this is what was like, Dremio and also like, Snowflake supporting the Iceberg format,
Yeah.
right? And then you get a smaller amount is the hoodie, but hoodie has also this uh, shadow infrastructure, which is all the Hadoop environments that are on out there, right? I would imagine is that if you're a Hadoop user, which you probably have petabytes of data, right? Because you're using it for long-term storage, right? Archival reasons, right? It's probably really easy for you to update is a Hadoop environment into a hoodie environment relatively faster than any of the other environments, right? Um, but still, if you ask me right now, I think you're gonna have is this. I think so. The big one would be Delta Lake, right? And as time goes on, uh, I think that Hadoop and Iceberg is going to gain market share against Delta Lake, and Delta will probably shrink down more. But
But
will
what
it
does this
be
mean from a
very
catalog perspective, Albert? I mean, Delta does have it inbuilt, no catalog, or the Unity one for the commercial option. But what does it mean if Iceberg is getting traction from a catalog perspective? Is this good for Iceberg REST, for Nessie, or are there some commercial tendencies we should be aware of?
Yeah, so this is also a good point, right? Of what it means for the catalogs, right? And so um I think what the strategy will be is that so uh, if you use Delta Lake for instance with Unity Catalog, right? The idea, well, they say that they have a HMS option for Unity. I personally haven't tried it. I've had other people try to go use it. It kind of works from that standpoint. So I would offer as another path. So when I was doing testing with Apache Xtable, Apache Xtable has a utility feature that allows you to go scan Delta Lake files and then insert and create new metadata and insert into HMS, right? So this gives you a very interesting option. And it doesn't just do it also for Delta Lake. It actually does this for uh, hoodie files that are not stored inside of HMS and Iceberg files that are not stored in HMS or in Iceberg REST catalog. It can take any of those files and basically, suck up what it needs to insert that data into HMS so that now you can use a HMS plus open table format combination.
So sort
I
of the,
don't
the
think they
least common denominator again is HMS, and the X table is sort of adapted to bring it back into where we started. So we have
yes,
sort of the
yes,
snake biting itself.
yes, exactly right. So um because it still is the most common, right? And will Xtable adopt all these other things? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the newer systems, right? What's also interesting too. Okay, so we have this future situation, right? So if you look at who develops for all the major catalogs, right? So, for instance, Nessie, I believe, is primarily written by Dremio, right? Most of the commits, 90% plus comes from them, right? Uh, uh, HMS, has a bunch of different companies, to be very honest, right? It's a bunch of companies. I don't think so. There's not one
No, that's not
that
one. Yeah.
is truly dominant, right? Uh, REST catalog is primarily written by Tabular, right? And of course, Unity catalog is written by Databricks, right? So the question is that uh, you've got all these vendors that basically are dominating these catalogs, right? And then you've got this X table, which is to me is a translation layer, right? A omnidirectional translation layer for not just for the open table format, but also for the catalog layer. So who is a part of the X table? And if you look at who are the primary sponsors, you'll find it's like Google, and Microsoft that's in those picture, right? And actually, a part of the committer list also has Dremio too. Now, why would Google and Microsoft be interested in Xtable? And I think the reason why is because they're hedging their bets. They're hedging their bets that not one format is going to dominate the marketplace. So they want to be able to sponsor and help is a pathway to either migrate to another format or have technology to keep two open table formats in sync, right? I think that's an interesting,
Yes, and as you
that's what
said,
I
this is
get.
where we started out with, right? It's the storage format. It is not the catalog.
Yes, exactly, right. So you have this like so let's provide interoperability on the opens table format. Maybe it will provide some interoperability on the catalog layer, right? So depends if Microsoft was to support it, right? And then you also see, Dremio has always said that they are the best, open data lakehouse using the Iceberg format, right? And so why would they join Xtable? And if you see there's a matrix on out there that the first format that they are going to read from is Delta Lake. And that's very interesting. So Dremio can go and read write on Iceberg, and Xtable now gives them the capability to read. I
Delta.
think the idea here is that they'll be able to suck data on out from the Delta Lake community and be able to at least get access to that, and then
Yeah. I
be
mean, in
able to
parallel with the
either.
recent developments in Delta 3.x, we have added the capability to write Iceberg metadata straight into the Delta files, right? So it's sort
Yes.
of growing together from multiple sides, not only from Xtable.
Yeah, so that's also an interesting insight you have, George, because you know, so so um, One House is one of the primary committers for Xtable, and that makes sense, right? They want is the ability to read and write from all the table formats, right? And their idea, largely, why they call themselves One House, is that doesn't matter what your Delta your data lake is, it'll be multiple formats. We will support them all, but we happen to be a huge committer on one of them, which is Hoodie. If you actually go to the One House website, they'll actually support Iceberg and other formats along with Hoodie as part of their
Yeah.
open data
Let me
lake
Let
pull
me
this
pull
up.
this
So
up.
it's
So
it's,
it's
it's actually at the
actually at
back
the
of
back of
us
us
whilst we're
whilst we're
talking,
talking,
Albert.
Albert.
The one
The
house
one house
page.
page.
Oh, yeah. Um, And so we can kind of understand why one house does what they go do, right? Uh, and you know, so for them, having the ability to convert formats is critical for their overall mission. Delta Lake's providing Uniform, right? Uniform 3, which you're implying, that's the equivalent of Apache Xtable for the Delta Lake community. Because they're saying to their community is like, oh, if you are all in Databricks, right? We will able to read Iceberg. We're able to write to Iceberg. We're able to read from Hoodie and whatnot. You don't need to ever move out of the ecosystem. You can just stay in the Delta Lake of ecosystem, and we'll be able to serve your needs, right? Uh, I understand where they're coming from. What's interesting is that Apache Iceberg and the Tabler folks, they don't have is a translation layer, right? They're all in just on Iceberg, meaning that they don't have a equivalent of uniform or Xtable itself. Um, I think that's really interesting as a strategy of the product itself.
Yeah. And do you think these open formats will overtake the closed ones? Because what I observed is that BigQuery, that Snowflake, they are so popular because it's a fully managed service and people don't want to care about the details. They want to have their old Exadata, Oracle, or Teradata appliance back, but now in the cloud, more scalable, more easy to use.
All right. Well, I think what happens is that as time goes on, we'll eat it away, right? So like most technology that's gone through the various generations, right? Or even just you think about the OLAP market in general. Most people, once they paid for a piece of technology, they're going to stay on this for 3, 5, 10 years, right? And it's not worth it for them to migrate that data to a new OLAP platform because that they built the business case for on this 3, 5, 10 year type of roadmap, right? So I think what's happened is those people that have already moved to Snowflake, to Redshift, to BigQuery, right, to Microsoft Analytics Service, right, they've already that ship has sailed, right? Majority of it, right? 90% plus, right? But the new companies that are the companies that have greenfield OLAP needs. I don't think that they are picking, the snowflakes of the world, the Teradatas of the world anymore. Because for them, they're like, well, we don't have this legacy, right? And
Yeah.
we build everything net new, right? So this generation is going to pick those technologies and time is going to go on out. And I think this is very analogous to the way applications are built, right? A lot of companies are not going to go retrofit an older application. They'll just go and says, we'll run that application, but we'll build the new application on the new modern stack, and then we'll
Yeah.
deprecate the old one as it goes on out, right?
I mean, what I think what we should add here, what is a really cool feature about all of these table formats is that they provide a change data capture feed, which is usually not part of what the databases offer, at least not as something that is accessible to the end user. It is part of the internal materialized view logic, but you cannot tap into it in an open, extensible way. And this is so powerful when you want to build stable data pipelines.
Yes, not only that, but all the newer features too. It's like time travel, for instance, right? Being able to ask the same questions from a specific point in time, right? Uh, I find as a data engineer, it's so difficult in analytics. It's like you think of a new problem, a new question to go ask, and the problem is your data doesn't look that way anymore, right? Or it
Yeah.
doesn't, or you have something that you want to go answered at that point in time, and don't have an easy way, or even backups, right? The thing is that with something like time travel, I don't, I made a mistake. No, you don't, you can easily reverse it, right? Because you can go back to, before the mistake was happened, this is what the record looked like, right?
And this is a
And
really
so,
important thing. Like 1 week or so ago on Hacker News, like there was a big article with everyone discussing this one mistake a production newbie data engineer made, and he was dropping table customers on production or something like this. And they all replied with, "Yes, this happened to me as well. Welcome, rookie." So it's
yes,
a
yes.
major thing to have this time travel feature.
It's a major feature, right, from that standpoint, and I think it also solves a different maybe it's also a OLAP specific problem that maybe TPs don't have yet, which is that when you go, when you think about deleting for a TP, the database may be very small, but when you're talking about when it's terabytes and petabytes, it's a lot of data for you to go and
It's
delete,
even more data
right?
to backup, right? You want to have a
Yeah,
couple of
it's
days of
more data for
history
you
if
to
you
back
put it
up.
into a backup. It's
Uh,
crazy.
exactly. I mean, you look at the most modern backup systems today for OLAP systems is that they back up on a partition by partition level because they can't just do it for the entire database, right? I think on average, it's like what, 1 terabyte. It takes 2 hours to back up on
I don't know
average.
the numbers, but Albert, I have to ask one question. Have these people that do partition-wise backups ever tried a restore operation?
Yeah, I would say that they try to, right? Well, this is maybe some other fallacy that they think is that, theoretically, when you do these backups, so the new modern OLAP systems all store their data on S3, right? So, you know, the Snowflake architecture, the BigQuery architecture, Trino's architecture, Starbucks architecture, they all store in object stores, right, as their primary data storage mechanism. And the idea here is that, well, S3 never goes down, right? And so therefore, why do we need backups, quote unquote, right? Of course, you still need backups, but the thing is, the problem is backups just take so long, right? And uh, and and the question becomes is that, uh, even if you do a backup, it's not like the old days of a binary backup, right? There, when you're doing it on S3, you're typically seeing these Parquet files that are in flight, and so you also need to figure out not just that, the files themselves, but whether or not you're even backing up the HMS is in sync with the files underneath. Anyways, I'm just saying that the backup has a different. There's a lot of different problems with that. But the short answer is, um, you can never back up fast enough, right? There's too much data from that standpoint, right? Uh, you got a terabyte of data, then you have to back up a terabyte. Like how, your data is going to be, at least by the time you finish the backup, your backups are 2 hours old, right? Uh, and if you try to restore that, it'll take another 2 hours for you to come back online. Um,
And this is fatal because we are moving not only to more streaming and real-time interactions, but we are moving away from strategic PowerPoint reporting. The management makes a decision and months later you see an impact. We're moving towards real-time data applications actually driving business, where data sits on the core critical path of a business, right? So you don't want to be
yeah,
down anymore.
you don't want to be down anymore. And so I think that's also a larger uh, macro issue or macro trend in the in the industry, is that you look at it, that where the fight is going. Like, MySQL, Postgres, and MongoDB are gaining OLAP-like features, right? Being
Yes,
able to do.
AlloyDB from Google, for example, adds columnar stuff to Postgres. I think it's quite cool.
Yeah, it's quite cool, right? So they're getting those type of, analytic features, along with the ability to query, large data sets, terabyte plus. And then you look at Snowflake, they're trying to go and lower their transaction times, right? They're trying to get to the level of TP speeds, right? So you look at like a simple insert in MySQL, right? Or even a MongoDB, you're looking at, ranging between 4 to 8 milliseconds for a single insert, right?
Yeah.
And you can't do this easily inside of Snowflake, right? Because it just wasn't designed that way for you to be able to do an insert that. But they're trying to make it, faster and faster. So, you know, maybe in some future point in time, uh, there may be not a OLTP and AP anymore. It'll just be a single database, right?
Do you mean
And you
do you refer to these dynamic tables here of Snowflake or something
uh,
else?
or, or maybe something else. We're not sure. Like, so if you look at things like PingCap, right? Like they talk about, like, hybrid, databases, right? Where they're actually even store some of the data as row based, and other places they store it also as columnar, right? Uh, the idea is that you want to be the best of both worlds, but you pay maybe the penalty on storage or running like different types of clusters, right? It is a very interesting concept because we've come to this, historically we've always had this idea like, okay, like, OLTP is very fast. It's like the race car, right? Very fast for inserts and lookups for single records, right? And it's very, very specialized. And then you got OLAP, which is like I'm doing aggregations across billions of rows, and that's also specialized. And for them to kind of converge to a single database, uh, what does that look like? Is it two engines in one database? Is it a columnar system with a row in one of the columns? Right? Don't know. Right? So everybody's trying to
Yeah.
figure this on out.
But
But
it's
I
not
think,
only DuckDB, right? It's not the simple solution to everything.
yeah, maybe it could be, right? I think so. No one quite knows what that view looks like, right? Um, so if we knew what the crystal ball is, we could go and predict all these things. But yet again, it comes back down to, I think, as tech companies, we have to hedge, right? Uh, and we know
But I
data is
think we should
valuable.
ask our viewers of the show, Albert, what they think about the crystal ball is on this topic, maybe. So please maybe comment also down below, and let's see what we can come up with together.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Like if you guys have opinions, the larger, the listeners of this chat, like share with your views about what you think it is, because it's very, very interesting. I mean, like, I think all of us come from different places. I mean, I used to go work for a company that is building software, an OLAP system in the space. Before that, I used to work at MongoDB, right, as a TP engine. And so you look at the strategies of where they're trying to, address in the market. It is really interesting about how everybody's approach, and whether or not it will win or not. You know, uh, it's hard to say, right? We always have that conversation about like VHS versus beta. I remember, back in the day. I mean, you know, beta was superior in terms of technologies, smaller, better fidelity, everything, but they didn't necessarily win, right? And so, uh, I think we're at this transition point where, they always say software eats itself. I think data eats itself. Data technology eats itself. And so, you know, what what will happen 5 years from now? Maybe we'll figure out is a new either data format, or maybe we figure out is a different way to solve problems, right?
I think this is a good comment to conclude for today. We're already a bit over time from what we initially planned. And I think both of us hope that you really like this type of show. See you back for the coming shows. We have 3 types of formats. One is real-world discussions with war stories from the field. The second one is news, what is the latest technology. And last but not least, like in the startup world, discussing fuck-ups, discussing what went wrong, but also the main learnings from it, how you improve our architectures, make them more resilient. Thank you, and goodbye from my side, from Georg.
All right.